Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 6, 2026, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Schweikert, for 30 minutes.
All right, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. Shall we have some fun with math and economics? Because it's something we just don't hear a lot of here on the floor of the House. Remember, this is my therapy because I often sit in the back of the room and stew when I hear people say things that it's obviously they didn't pull their calculator up. I'm going to try two things tonight. And so if you're actually interested in budgets and economics, have fun with me. If you're not, go watch Netflix. We're going to actually try a couple concepts. Where the money's going, and within that, the scale of our debt and deficits. And the fact of the matter is we are what's called interest fragility. That think about what happened over the last couple days of the discussions coming from the White House, from us, the bond markets actually bounced up about 30 basis points. And we were just playing on the back of napkins, the math. And if that had held for an entire year, just those 30 basis points would have been like $33 billion of additional interest. So I wanted to try to actually explain that and then actually talk about something that's really interesting. The economy from a GDP calculation standpoint, so this is just the economists looking at the vitality in the economy, is remarkably good. We're running over a 5% GDP, which if you go back and look at the economic projections, it's double what many of our smartest economists in the country thought we'd be at a year ago. But our spending, because of interest and health care and the reality we're going to have to deal with, it's debt deficits and demographics. Once again, remember, we functionally have the same number of 18-year-olds today as we had 20 years ago, but we have double the number of 65 and up. It's just what we are. Don't get mad. It's not Republican or Democrat. It's just demographics. And understanding when our brothers and sisters move into their earned benefit years, what it costs. And the fact of the matter is, this Congress refuses to do the hard things because in 6.5 years, the Social Security Trust Fund is empty and you get a 24% cut in your check, and we double senior poverty. We double the number of baby boomers who will live on the street. In 6.5, 7 years, the Medicare Trust Fund is empty, and your hospital gets an 11% cut, and a bunch of the financing of things like Medicare Advantage and those actually just becomes, let's just say, difficult. So let's walk through some of this. I pulled out this chart because I haven't used it in a few months, and I'm realizing there's not enough folks, particularly the staff. Remember, I often do these because I'm talking to 1,000 televisions around the campus. So the room looks empty, but we're on televisions, and hopefully there's some staffers who are working on policy who will understand how important these numbers are. Do you see the blue portion of that chart, Mr. Speaker? That's discretionary. That's all you and I get to vote on. As members of Congress, we only vote on the discretionary portion. And this was a 2025 chart. Today, it's probably only 25%, not 26% of the total spending. Every dime of that is borrowed. The math for last year, for every dollar we took in tax receipts, we spent $1.43. We're just in the back talking to one of my joint economic economists. This year, we think it's lower, but we're still not, because we're having to make the adjustments on the student loans and those sorts of things. It could be down to 137, 140. But think about that. Last year, for every dollar it came in, we spent $1.43. So realize all this in the red is on autopilot, and a portion of it is actually on borrowed money. So if every dime of defense, if you just do the hierarchy, is borrowed, every dime of non-defense discretionary is borrowed, but that's only about $2 trillion. A wedge of the mandatory also ends up being borrowed. So we're going to actually have to walk. Oh, one other thing I want to point out on the chart. If you actually take a look at the hierarchy of spending, Social Security is number one, $1.5 trillion. Guess what's number two if you do the total interest paid? It's interest. You know, here's interest to the public who bought our bonds, whether it be your pension plan, your as an individual, another country, or the interest we have to pay back to the trust funds when we reach into the Social Security Trust Fund, the Medicare Trust Fund, the Railroad Retirement Trust Fund. Those things, we borrow the money, we owe them interest. Total interest last year was about $1.2 trillion, making interest the second biggest expenditure in this government. Medicare, number 3. Medicaid and the healthcare subsidies, number 4. Defense is actually number 5. So I always love it. I get these conversations back home often if I have a Democrat. Well, if you cut defense, and then they look at you in horror when you say, you do realize in the hierarchy of spending, defense is actually the 5th biggest expenditure in government. So, all right, something else. This one is actually good news of some of what's happening. So this is actually one of my favorite charts because it actually demonstrates here's our tax receipts as a percentage of the economy. We were basically getting about 17.1% of the economy. We have some new math right now. It says we're probably peaking over 18%, maybe even higher, of the economy coming in tax receipts. That's wonderful. Except for one really yucky thing. Our spending. Remember, when last year, when we were getting 17.1% of the economy in taxes, we functionally were spending 23.4%. And that delta is the deficit. So what happens when your tax receipts are going up as a percentage of the size of the economy and the economy is growing, but healthcare and interest are going up faster? Are we going to tell the truth about that? Look, basic factoids, and I did this last week, but I want to say it again because it doesn't seem to be sinking in. In about 36 months, half of every dime that the federal government spends, so 50% of all of our spending, will go to those 65 and up. Moody's Analytics has in 2035, so what is that, 8, 9 budget years from now, 30% of all tax receipts going just to interest. Economic paper was actually interesting. It was actually an economic paper demonstrating that Italy actually was more fiscally sound in the long term than the United States. So when you see that headline, you sit down and read it. Within there was a factoid that if you use a 6% generational discount rate, which is reasonable, it could be slightly high, a child born today, you need 104% of their lifetime earnings just to pay federal pension obligations. Social Security, Medicare, military, federal retirement. Think of that. So child born today, you need every dime they're ever going to make in their entire life plus another 4% to pay pension obligations. Does anyone see the immorality going on? But we can't talk about that because that would be hard. I believe the American people are a hell of a lot smarter than we are. They're ready for us to tell them the truth about math. But one of the first things we as the political class have to do is stop lying about math. So let's actually walk through some of this. And I'm going to blast through these because I'm trying to make a point. Also, before I go much further, if someone actually wants to bathe in the truth in math and what the future looks like and how we can fix it, go to the Joint Economic Committee Republicans. We publish some amazing things. Every weekday, we do a text message to a few thousand people we call the Daily Debt. And it shows you how much came in, how much we spent. We give you a 12-month window so it fixes ups and downs. We'll also give you the fiscal year as it sits. Right now, the Daily Debt, I just got my text message, we're borrowing over $71,000 every second. $71,000 a second, and that's the 12-month calculation. So it makes up all the highs and lows and averages it out. But you got to understand, this ain't a game. Because that $71,000 a second, we need to have buyers of our bonds. And we make our buyers of our bonds cranky, it gets really expensive. So this chart here is just trying to make a point of what's going on in our debt and deficits. Remember, discretionary spending, the pie chart I just showed you, the blue, is flat. It's not growing. Yes, there's waste and fraud in it. We need to eliminate that. We actually believe technology would eliminate that, except I can't believe how the bureaucracies are terrified of the technology it can find the waste and fraud. But our growth is in the mandatory spending, the promises we've made that we got to keep, but we got to figure out a way to finance. What this chart is showing you is, you see the slightly darker color here? That's the primary deficit. That's actually programs that we're spending more money than we have coming in. But you see all this lighter purple? That's the interest we owe. And the point we're making, if we have a $2 trillion deficit this year, but interest is $1.2 trillion, interest now is the primary driver, and number two is healthcare costs. We just have this problem of telling the truth about healthcare costs are out of control, and in many states, government is the primary, is the majority of money spent in healthcare. All right, so let's have some fun here. I know we're all interested in bonds and how they refinance. So remember, if you have $38.5 trillion of debt out there, over $30 trillion of that is sold. That's what they call publicly held debt. About a third of that, and I was going to show the charts of all the papers and the notes and the bonds, and I realized no one cares. But about a third of that, so let's call it $10 billion, has to be refinanced this year. And much of that is coming off of lower bond prices from a couple years ago. So on average, we're picking up a point of interest, 1.5, some two. But there's your problem. The chart here I'm just trying to show you is we have to constantly be refinancing, and we're refinancing at higher interest rates because we're making the markets cranky, and we're not telling the bond markets that we're serious about taking on our debt and deficit. Mr. Speaker, have you ever heard the term bond vigilantes? Happened to the United States in the 90s, where we suddenly were making the bond markets cranky. They were starting to demand premiums, and our debt was a fraction of a fraction of a fraction what it is today. We are on the cusp of putting the bond market in charge of this country, not us. It's a really dangerous game we're playing. And one of the ways you mitigate that is you tell the bond market saying, look, we're adults, we're being serious, we understand we have a demographic, we have a healthcare spending problem, we're going to take it on. We're going to adopt technologies, we're going to adopt other ways to make our brothers and sisters healthy. We're going to telegraph to the markets, we're stable, we're America, we're the credible investment. If you think I'm engaging in hyperbole, look at the price of gold. If the price of gold isn't telegraphing something to you, go back to your basic economics class. There's something really wrong out there. We're making markets nervous. So it is estimated that, let's make sure this is for this, from 2025 to 2026 fiscal years, we are going to have to borrow. This is what we call virgin borrowing. It's new issuances, about $470 billion a quarter. So that's less than $2 trillion, but it's pretty darn close. That's on top of what we have to refinance. So when you start to get a sense of what we're bringing to the bond markets, it's more than just the borrowing, it's the refinance. We're subject to the interest rates. We need to be understanding, convince the people that are loaning us money, whether it be your personal pension, your savings account, Japan, whoever's buying our debt, that we're stable, that we're adults, that we understand we got a demographic problem. But we're going to engage in adult-like technology, borrowing policy, the things to manage our debt and minimize it. Okay, this chart is substantially unreadable, but I wanted to actually just show it for the fun of it. This is one of the things we use in our economic shop, where we try to actually say, okay, here's 1 year, if it went up 0.5%, that 1 year cost $206 billion over 10. It's basically a table that says if interest rates pop up this much and it only lasts for a year or 2 years, here's what it costs us over the 10-year window. And the whole point we do this chart is to start to demonstrate so many of the things we talk about here. We're going to save $1 billion. That's a lot of money. We believe annualized we're going to borrow over $6 billion a day. First quarter of the fiscal year, we're borrowing over $8 billion a day. And the arguments here, the debates we will have here often to save money, which are wonderful. We will have borrowed more money during the debate than whatever the item being debated would have ever saved. Because how do you talk about the drivers of debt? The other thing we also have to deal with is when we get our policies wrong, when we make the bond markets nervous, when they don't see we're fixated on debt management, fiscal reality, and interest rates go up on U.S. sovereigns, they raise everything. It's more than just the money we spend here. And look, we've had months last year where we had to borrow money to pay for our borrowing. That's partially because the tax collection cycle goes up and down. But we raise your credit card, we raise your car, we raise everything. So when we screw up U.S. sovereigns, we make bond markets nervous, they go up 30 basis points. You got to understand, that just raised every cost for borrowing up and down through the economy. So it's more than just what I sit here and spout about saying, we're going to pay this much in interest. Think about what we did to the American family, to the businesses, to the small businesses, to the farmers. We somehow seem detached from the reality of the math. All right. Now let's actually talk about where some of the money's going and why we have to do such borrowing. CBO, 2025 Medicare accuracy. They actually did okay. But okay, when you're talking $1 trillion is, hey, they only missed it by like 7%. Well, it turns out to be like $70 billion of spending. Medicare, 2025 outlays increased by $77 billion, 8%. Now that was, CBO was projecting only 51. From this scale of accounting, it's pretty accurate. But you got to understand, we're looking at an environment right now where we expect Medicare spending to double, go from $1 trillion to $2 trillion over the next 7 years. And so far, every healthcare chart I have when we are looking at what was the closing numbers for the 2025 fiscal year, they're all in excess of what we projected. So if you start to have a world where you're sitting at 7% medical inflation, even if you have tax receipts going up 3-4%, we're borrowing more money. So let's actually take another look at one of these. Major healthcare programs were up $150 billion over the previous year, and it's still ran at the major healthcare programs came in at 9% increase from the previous years. Does anyone see a math problem? You have an economy right now, it's growing at 5%. It's amazing. But yet our spending, when you tack in the interest rates, healthcare spending, if healthcare spending is over 9%, you got a math problem. And then the argument we have from our Democrats is, but we need to subsidize more. We've turned healthcare into financial engineering instead of helping our brothers and sisters be healthier. Legalize the technology, legalize the processes. You realize so many things where you could crash the price of healthcare. This body actually keeps it legal. We're going to do a number of healthcare bills. Every single one of them is wonderful, except for one small problem. They're rounding errors. I love price transparency. I don't believe you can have functioning markets without price transparency. Every academic paper I have in my office says it's only about 0.5% of price improvement. And yet, major healthcare programs, 9% increase in spending. So you get 0.5%, and in a single year, I got 9% growth in spending. Does anyone see a mismatch? Great policy, great rhetoric, sounds great on the campaign trail, and doesn't save us. Now, for those folks who know, how do I say this nicely? I like Medicare Advantage. It's called Medicare Part C if you're geeky. The majority of our brothers and sisters on Medicare actually are Medicare Advantage. It's functionally supposed to be a managed care optionality for your health care. So you get a network, you know what your benefits are. We have a problem. We have these things called MedPAC reports. I have a stack of them on my desk. And on my desk, if you open them up, which I'm sure every member of Congress opens up these and goes through them, it will tell you Medicare Advantage right now is costing 120% of fee-for-service. Medicare Advantage, which came into effect in 2005, is supposed to come at 95% of fee-for-service. That's a 25% delta. We've been looking at charts and data and trying to say, hey, we want to protect Medicare Advantage. That's what seniors have chosen. They like it. Can we actually get rid of the risk scoring and some of the games being played in the star ratings where they're milking the system? Because think of that. The Medicare MedPAC reports basically say there's almost $2 trillion of misalignment and fraud over 10 years. That's actually the biggest in government. I know some people have the problems with the difference between millions and billions and trillions. Trillions really big. And now you look at this chart here. Overpayment per MA beneficiary, and this is done by the MedPAC report. So this wasn't even done by my economist. This is done by a room full of people that just specialize in Medicare Advantage. 2025, 14. Actually, I think that comes out to $250 billion. But this comes also to $200 billion, I believe, of misspending. Am I reading that correctly? Yep. Yep. So when you see 1,400 billion, and over $200 billion is in the MedPAC report as being bad payments, misalignments, abuse, taking advantage of the system, waste and fraud. Mr. Speaker, if we're going to do a second reconciliation, I would propose one of the most moral and rational economic things we can do is let's just fix Medicare Advantage and put it back to how it's supposed to work. And I know we have armies of lobbyists in our hallways here trying to stop us. Can you imagine why? If there's a couple $100 billion in play, they're going to absolutely knife us to stop us from doing the reforms. Are we tough enough to do what's right for the American people, for the next generation? Because think of this. Mr. Speaker, I have a 3-year-old. And yes, my wife's my age. We adopted a little boy. And same birth mom as our little girl. So I have a 3-year-old. When my 3-year-old is about 23 years old, every tax in the United States has to be doubled just to maintain baseline spending. Is that moral? Is that the America? You have kids. Is this the America where always the next generation gets to prosper more, because that is not the model now. Next generation is going to be poor. And it doesn't have to be. We're on the cusp of amazing technologies, synthetic biology, cures of diseases, things we can do that can make this another American century. You just need to tell the truth about the math and policy instead of the theatrics that go on in this place. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate for the 6 or 7 people that have been willing to listen to me. There's a way to make this work. It just turns out it's really hard. Are we ready to do hard things for the country? And then go home and try to explain it to our voters that we're doing the right thing for them. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does the gentleman have a motion?
Speaker, I move that the House stand adjourned.
The question is on the motion to